Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Education Corner podcast would like to welcome Mrs. Sally Ann Huang, High Master at St Paul's School, London. St Paul's is an independent school offering an outstanding all-round education for gifted boys aged 7 to 18 years. The founder, John Collett, opened the doors of St Paul's School in 1509 to educate boys from all nations and countries indifferently, regardless of race, creed, or social background. They are committed to the founder's vision and offer financial support for any boy who is successful in gaining a place at the school on academic merit and who fulfills the means-tested bursary criteria. Sally has over 30 years' experience in independent education and has held headships at schools including James Allen's Girls' School, also known as JAGS, and Kent College, Pembury, before she joined St Paul's in 2020. Sally Ann Huang was also chair of the HMC, the Headmasters and Headmistresses Conference, from 2020 to 2021. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Really lovely to be here.
Firstly, could you tell us more about your background and how you came to your role at St Paul's?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the north of England. I grew up in Bolton outside of Manchester. And my parents were grammar school educated, but didn't do A levels, never mind go to university, and expected, I think, for their children to go to grammar school. But because that situation changed, they ended up where my brother, who's 10 years older than me, was identified by his primary head as perhaps being able to get into the local independent school, which was wonderful Bolton School, which is still such a great player in that whole area. And he went on an assisted place. So I don't come from a kind of independent education background. We were the first generation, and we only got into independent education through that kind of system. And then my brother was the first person in the family to go to university. And 10 years later, I was the first person to go to Oxbridge. So I think I learned very early on that education mattered, that it was transformative, and that actually access to education was a big deal. So that kind of explains my background. Actually, Bolton School, as people will know, is set up with a girls' division and a boys' division. So I went to the girls' division and really valued that. I really think going to an all-girls school empowered me to be confident and to make strong choices. But we had the boys' division next door, and we had co-educational experiences. And then that's something that I saw again when I was at James Allen's Girls' School working with Dulwich College. And of course, it's really important to St Paul's with St Paul's Girls' School and the very formal understanding that we have with them. So again, some things about my background explain the things that I'm interested in now. But my first two headships were both in all-girls schools. My deputy headship was in an all-girls school. So in some ways, I think I wouldn't have seemed a natural match to come and run this big boys' school. But it's really important to me that I'm a mother of sons, that by the time I was doing this job, I had raised two boys to adulthood. I've got two brothers, and I'd worked really closely with Dulwich College and also was a governor at Tunbridge for 6 years. So actually, coming into boys' education in 2020 felt like a really natural place to be. And I absolutely love it. I think there's nowhere like St Paul's, and I always say that I have the best job in the world. So I pinch myself daily that I get to do this job.
That's so lovely. In your welcome on the school's website, you emphasise that being academic is not just about excellent exam results, which obviously parents would often associate with a school like St Paul's, but also about intellectual curiosity, finding out about the world, debating and being interested in what's going on around you. How do you instill these qualities in boys at St Paul's, and what impact do you feel that they have on the pupils both in school, and I think parents are increasingly thinking about beyond school?
Yeah, I think rightly so. I mean, we do get great grades, but I often say that we wouldn't get those grades if we just concentrated on the grades. That actually getting the boys to the point where they can be confident in their exams is actually about all the stuff around the outside of that, about seeing connections, about talking to each other. And actually the intellectual curiosity is the most important piece, because it then allows them to get great exams. But as you're saying, it turns them into people who are intellectually curious for the future, who are questioning, who are interested in discernment, judgment, hearing other people's opinions. And we know that in the world that we're in now and in the future, where there's so much talk about what AI will do, it's those skills rather than the exam results which are going to stand them in good stead. One of the things that I think is really interesting here at St Paul's is that we have this wonderful co-curricular program, and it includes all the things you would expect, like the music, the sport, the drama, but also over 100 clubs running in the week. And a lot of those clubs are academic in their nature. So Polycon, which is the politics and economics club, where they get external speakers or they talk about what's going on in the world. All of the academic departments have these clubs. And actually, a lot of the intellectual curiosity comes out of that. And we have this amazing vertical tutor system here where the boys are in tutor groups with older boys, but most of the clubs also welcome all the different year groups. So if you're a younger boy here, you can go in and hear older boys presenting on academic areas of interest, nothing to do with their A-level curriculum, just stuff that they're interested in. I noticed one of the boys who's in year 13 did a talk about ballet and Tchaikovsky, and they can go and hear that. And that's where wanting to know more, wanting to understand things intellectually becomes naturally part of life and not just what's going on in the classroom. And I found it really interesting when we had our last ISI inspection, which is just over a year ago. We were awarded one of these significant strengths that everybody makes so much about. But we didn't get it for the academic side of the school. We got it for the co-curricular, but not just for the fact that there is a wide programme, but that programme is contributing to the boys' personal development and their self-esteem. So it's not just a nice extra, it's actually fundamental to how they're developing. So we're really proud of that.
Wonderful. And it takes a lot of work, both staff and boys, to make sure it's all happening. The St Paul's was founded in 1509 to educate boys from all nations and countries indifferently. And the school continues to offer founders awards to cover school fees and additional costs, such as music lessons, sports, and school trips, to make St Paul's education more accessible to all. Could you tell us more about the impact of these bursaries and the importance of these opportunities at St Paul's?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Founders Award programme is really at the heart of what we do. And it's incredibly important, not just to me, but significantly to the governing body as well. So they're really supporting it and pushing it forward at a time when it might be easier to not because it's expensive. But we have great donors, including our current parents who want to support it. So the aim is that about 10% of the boys here are on Founders Awards. And the vast majority of those are really high levels of fee, so 85% and above, right up to 100% or beyond 100%, because we will cover things like trips and uniforms and travel and whatever it is that they need. And that's really transformative to those individuals. And we meet with recent Paulines who perhaps are studying brilliant, prestigious institutions, or they've now got really interesting careers where they perhaps want to give back to society. So it's clearly massively transformative for one individual. I think what's often less articulated is the impact it has on the community. So it goes back to that intellectual curiosity and the idea that John Collett wanted us to bring people in from all nations and countries, because it's about sharing different lived experiences. And we're very forward thinking at St Paul's. I think at a time where the idea of the traditional independent school is less appealing to Gen Z parents who aren't just doing that thing where they want to send their son to the same school they went to. So it's really important that there's diversity within the classroom. And that's diversity of thought, it's diversity in terms of ethnicity, but it's also diversity of socioeconomic background. And so when we bring these boys in on the Founders Awards, it's not just that we're doing something important for them, they do something really important for our community. And they bring that intellectual curiosity, that different background, those different arguments into the classroom, and that benefits everybody. So it's really core to our mission still.
And in this edition, we're particularly looking at boarding. And although most boys at St Paul's are day pupils, you do have some full and flexi boarding. provision. Could you tell us more about the boarding at St Paul's and how the pupils and families are benefiting? It must particularly help the international cohort, I'd
It
imagine.
does, although the international cohort isn't large. We're very diverse and international in terms of, we're in London and London is very international in its outlook. And so that's part of it. But boarding is very close to my heart. I was a house mistress at Sevenoaks and at Rodine. One of my sons boarded at Tunbridge. And I know all the many benefits there are to a boarding education. When I came to St Paul's, we only have one house. And we've grown the number of beds in there now to 43. But when I looked at it, I thought, how is that going to work? I'd worked in boarding communities of 300 or 400 pupils. Actually, I needn't have worried because it's really the closest, warmest boarding community that I've ever known. It's an extended family, really, in the middle of the school. The boarders are very involved in all of the school activities. And again, they almost have the best of both worlds because they have this very safe boarding environment where things like routines for getting their homework done or socializing at the weekend, they do incredible trips. That's all there for them. But they also have the benefit of a large day school and being in London. So it's a very different boarding experience to, say, being out at a rural boarding school. What we found is that it's become increasingly in demand. And I think about 3 or 4 years ago, we opened up a flexi boarding house. So that has 11 beds. And those beds are booked maybe 5 or 6 weeks in advance. And it's always full. But that might be families who say need to go and travel abroad for work for a week. And so the son might come into boarding, or he might be in the school play. And so he doesn't have to do the commute. So we've got these two things on offer. And I have to say, at the moment, they're really oversubscribed. It really appeals to people. I'm not sure why, but I think it's if I was forced to say, I'd say it's quite a unique offer in terms of boarding because of the big day community around, because of the proximity to London, and because of the flexibility. So it is something that I'd quite like to grow in the future because it's working very well here at the moment.
You recently launched the St Paul's School group with Durston House and Shrewsbury House School as founding members. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about this group and how you plan to work together to benefit pupils across all the member schools?
Yeah, it's a very exciting move for us. Obviously, lots of schools are coming together more at the moment in more challenging circumstances. I think our group is a little bit different because it's small and we're intending to keep it small. And we're really working with prep schools who have a long-standing relationship with us and are philosophically very aligned to us. So it's about a number of themes, really. I think the idea of keeping a not-for-profit prep school education as an option for parents is really important to us at the moment. And I think parents are increasingly aware of the differences between those different models. It's also about 13 plus transfer because as more and more schools are emphasizing their 11 plus transfer, 13 plus is less of an option available. And we believe that it is the best point of transfer for boys. I know it's not an option available to all boys, and I can't necessarily control that, but where I can control it, I want to keep it an option available to boys because we know that they mature at different rates to girls on average. And that point of transfer and coming into a bigger school with a larger number of older pupils, I really believe that works better for them at 13. And our own prep school, which is large, still transfers at 13. And it really feeds into our vertical tutor system because if you have 13-year-olds in a tutor group with 18-year-olds, it works really, really well. It wouldn't work with 11-year-olds. So a lot of it was about preserving 13 plus and making that a possibility still for families across London. And then, of course, the single sex boys element of it, which then fits in with the research centre, which we've also founded. So we want to be talking about what's best for boys and giving parents of boys that chance to ask who is thinking about the boys, who is putting the boys first. Because I think there's more of that discussion happening now, but it really hasn't been happening for years. And so forming the group and working with other great boys' schools was very much part of it. In terms of the benefits for the pupils, again, it goes back to that idea of curiosity and meeting people from different backgrounds and different areas. We are putting together a charter for the prep schools within the group where there will be a St Paul's programme that runs across those schools. So our own prep school here, which is brilliantly run, has the advantage of being attached to a senior school and all the facilities and the teaching and the learning that goes on at a senior school. So to provide that for all the pupils within the group, whether they want to come to St Paul's or end up at St Paul's, that doesn't matter. But the shared pedagogy, staff training, events on site, all of those things, and we're putting that together at the moment, and it's going to be really exciting. And I've already found that having these two brilliant heads, Giles Entwistle and Joanna Hubbard, to talk to and to swap ideas with has just been really fruitful. So that's fantastic. There will also be benefits to pupils within that school who want access to St Paul's, and there'll be a kind of stewarded pathway. We're not changing the academic standards at St Paul's. We've never pretended that we're for everybody. This is a school that moves at a fantastic pace, and it's not fair to bring pupils in who don't want to move at that pace. But working with Durston House and Shrewsbury House to maybe identify pupils earlier on who do want to come here and to help them get to that point and to work with them. So those are the big benefits. But I also hope that this is a benefit to boys' education and prep school education across London, because it's about collaborating. It's not about taking the pupils out of the prep schools or getting lots and lots of prep schools that we're not going to work with closely. So I'm proud of the fact that it's a model based on relationships and based on philosophy.
Yeah, and it works well with the 13 plus entry. You are part of the International Boys Schools Coalition, and have been doing an awful lot of work. We've been watching, and recently launched the St Paul's Research Centre for the Education of Boys. Why do you feel it is so important to have dedicated research into supporting boys, and what changes would you like to see across education to continue to support boys?
So I could do a whole podcast just about this, really, Chloe. It means everything to me. So as a mother of sons, I had felt for a long time that nobody was talking about the boys, and that it was really important. It's not just about single sex boys' schools, it's about boys in a co-educational setting, because boys have been falling behind girls at every level of education and in the workplace for a long time now. And when I first came to St Paul's, it was almost as though boys were seen as a problem that had to be solved, and you couldn't really speak up for them or advocate for them. And most of them are not a problem. Most of them are absolutely delightful and curious, and want to be helpful. And so I felt like having that voice to speak for them, but also to listen to them, was really needed. And that if a school like this, a highly successful boys' school, couldn't do that, then who is going to? So I joined the IBSC because if you are a specialist in boys' education in the UK, that is a much smaller group of schools than it ever has been before. And it's even smaller now because of the drive towards co-education in the face of VAT. So I joined the IBSC, and then I found that I was able to talk to heads in Australia and Canada and America who had similar experiences for what was going on in their schools and boys in their communities. And I just found that really inspiring. And I was lucky enough to become a trustee there 2 years ago, and to be on their research committee, where the IBSC does very large scale research across the group. At the moment, they're doing a piece with the University of New South Wales, and they've had access to, I think, 20,000 different boys to get the data. So I found that really inspiring. And I also learned that some of the international schools run research centres as academic departments within their schools to look at boys' learning. So that's where I got the idea from. It's not an original idea, but I think it is original in the UK. And my feeling is that if we do something well here for boys at St Paul's, we have a responsibility. It goes back to Collett's vision. We have a responsibility to try and disseminate that, to understand it, to work with other people, and to try and have an impact on all boys, not just boys who come to this school, because we are unusual in terms of how academically selective we are and where we're located. So how can we use our resources, our expertise, our enthusiasm to improve things for boys generally? And that's what the research centre is about. And I have been completely overwhelmed by people that want to work with us on this project. We had an IBSC regional conference here on the 27th of February, where Rory Stewart and the American psychologist Niobe Way were our keynote speakers. And pretty much everybody who attended wants to collaborate with us on this work. So at the moment, the challenge is just making sure we can do all of these things. The appetite for it is definitely there. So it's for me, it's been a real highlight of my career to be able to launch this and to have the positive response that we've had. And it makes me feel very excited and optimistic about the future for boys.
In addition to this, there are lots of challenges, as we all know, facing boys and young men outside of education, with research by the Children's Commissioner reporting that 48% of boys have seen harmful content online by the age of 17. How are you addressing these issues, including the violent and perhaps misogynistic online content with boys, and supporting them to form positive relationships online and in person throughout their time at St Paul's and their teenage years, really?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think those of us who work with boys and have been listening to boys for years know that this is a challenge and they're quite open to talking about it. I thought it was interesting when Adolescence, the TV program, came out 12 months ago, because it was great television and amazing acting and really clever the way it was filmed. But to anybody actually working with teenagers, none of that was a revelation. I think there's a deputy head in there who claims she hadn't heard of Andrew Tate. Now, that isn't true. There's no deputy head in this country who hadn't heard of Andrew Tate. But I think the problem was that those things, they're the outliers. Most teenage boys are not violent and not misogynistic. And so if you listen to them and you give them the opportunity to talk about these things in an open way where they feel they're not going to be judged, and you don't shut them down, then you don't drive them towards the Andrew Tates of this world. So here at St Paul's, we've completely revamped our PSHE program in the last 5 years. We get feedback from the boys about what they want to hear about. And so it's really central. But we've also tried to emphasize the positive way you might be as a man. So it's not just don't be this, it's terrible. Clearly it is terrible, but what might you be? And we've also emphasized character education and values and kindness. And I think offering role models is really key to young men. And so thinking about the men and the women whom they see in leadership here, the prefects that we choose, the sports captains, and seeing good behavior model, that's been key as well. So trying to talk about it positively and not just, gosh, this is a scary problem and you're all the problem and we've got to solve you, but actually, how can we construct this in a positive way?
And parents are also increasingly interested in how schools, and I think I mentioned this earlier, are preparing young people, and obviously this is all a part of it, but also for careers and life beyond education, and developing employability and life skills. Could you tell me a little bit about how you're equipping the boys with key skills for life beyond St Paul's, especially for the ones whose lives and careers might well be impacted with technology such as AI and the way the world is moving so fast?
Yeah, I think this is the most important thing that we do really is there's no point educating them well at school and them not being prepared for the adult world, whatever that adult world might be. And I think things like discernment, flexibility, empathy, those soft skills, some of that comes out in the classroom, absolutely. But as I was saying before, a lot of it comes out through our co-curricular program. A lot of it comes out through the leadership opportunities that the boys have here, the volunteering that they do, our emphasis on diversity. So I think we're preparing them really well for the 21st century. The great thing about the Poor Lines is, they're almost like Renaissance men, because although they might choose 4 subjects at A level, they might also do an EPQ, an extended project qualification, in something that's got nothing to do with their A levels, or their co-curricular activities might be nothing to do with their A levels as well, because they're really involved in different programs in terms of music or sport or whatever it is. So I think that idea of a holistic individual who is ready for the world in a more rounded way and not just focus on their academic life is really key. I also always joke that we don't produce a lot of prime ministers here at St Paul's. We let other people do that. But we do produce a lot of entrepreneurs and problem solvers. So if you look at the OP community, I think there's a disproportionate number of people who set up their own businesses or have come up with scientific discoveries, or they're writers. And I think it's those skills that we need to keep emphasizing. They're in this school's DNA, actually, but we need to keep emphasizing those, because those are the things that can't be replaced by machines.
Very much so. And St Paul's is proud to be the UK's top performing boys' school, and between a quarter and a third of your pupils accept offers from Oxbridge each year, as well as going to Russell Group and top US universities. How do you feel you're kind of achieving this? How are you preparing them to succeed through this very competitive university administration admissions rather process and succeed in further education?
So I think one of the key things that we emphasize with the boys is that they should follow their intellectual curiosity. So don't go for that particular subject at Cambridge because, you know, the odds might look better at getting in, because actually you're not going to be happy, you're not going to flourish, and you're not going to succeed in a way that then takes you on to your next career. So we do emphasize that. We have a lot of resources around the boys. It's a very large 16 plus school. There's over 200 boys in year 12 and in year 13, but they have their own UCAS Universities advisors. If they're applying to the US, they have a separate advisor there. We have a whole department running international and US universities with full-time employees doing that. And we also encourage the boys to keep their doors open because they can, if they want to, apply to the UK and at the US. So very often we will have boys who come away with options on both sides of the Atlantic or in another country. A lot of them are very interested in Bocconi, for example, in Milan at the moment. So we allow them that wide range. And I think what's been successful for us is actually allowing them to be individuals. What is the course that matches them? Where is that course? And how can we make sure they're prepared for that, as opposed to in any way saying, you know, this number of Oxbridge offers would be the gold standard, and so we need to funnel you into that. So actually that bespoke program with bespoke advisors and talking all the time about their intellectual ideas and the areas that they really want to pursue. And that means they don't just get onto the course, but they flourish on the course. And it also then leads them on to what they might want to do beyond that course as well.
Very much so. And finally, you've obviously, I've been watching the work going on with the St Paul's Research Centre for the Education for Boys, but beyond obviously a big project there, what are your hopes and plans for the future of St Paul's School?
So this maybe doesn't sound aspirational enough. The research centre is a big thing, the group is a big thing. But in many ways, if in 5 to 10 years' time, we're still the top performing boys' school in the country, we're supporting the prep schools around us, and the boys are still getting the right outcomes for them as individuals, that will be a huge success. So that's my main aim, is to focus on what we're good at already, make sure that we keep improving on that, and make sure that we keep encouraging the boys to become young men with purposeful lives in the 21st century. So some of it is about more of the same, but of course you can't maintain that without always sharpening your saw, without improving your pedagogy, without looking at the opportunities around you, without staying on top of all the challenges that you have. There are things on site. I mean, you probably know we've rebuilt virtually the whole site since 2015, and the last piece of that was our new prep school, which just opened this January, which is really stunning. So we don't have massive building projects, but I would like to do more with boarding, for example. I'd like to do more with the sporting facilities. So having done the massive rebuild, I think we're back in the world of what do we just improve on a regular basis. But fundamentally, I think if we can keep driving for the very best provision for boys and extend that beyond our own site, nationally and internationally, that would be the central aim for me.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for your time. It's been so wonderful talking to you.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having me.